My family laughed at my dreams of success, now they'd beg me for help after my empire. The plush leather of my office chair molded to my back, a silent testament to years of quiet, relentless effort. Outside the panoramic window, the city lights twinkled like scattered diamonds, each one a tiny beacon of ambition and enterprise. It was late, as it often was, but the solitude suited me. My desk, usually a battlefield of screens and blueprints, was currently clear, save for a single, unassuming document, a detailed financial statement, a grim portrait of impending bankruptcy, signed by both my Uncle Cyrus and Aunt Seraphina. Just hours ago, they had been here, in this very room, their faces a canvas of desperation and a fragile, quickly crumbling pride. They had come to beg. I remembered the tremor in Uncle Cyrus's voice, the uncharacteristic fidgeting in Aunt Seraphina's manicured hands. They spoke of unforeseen market shifts and unfortunate investment turns, skirting around the true depth of their recklessness, even as they pleaded for a lifeline. Cyrus, the man who once strutted through family gatherings like a peacock, now resembled a plucked pigeon. Seraphina, who never missed an opportunity to flaunt her latest designer bag, clutched a worn, anachronistic purse, her usual sparkle replaced by a dull anxiety. They had tried to frame it as a temporary setback, a minor inconvenience that a true family member would naturally alleviate. But I knew better. I knew the precise moment their empire of borrowed superficiality began to crumble, long before they admitted it to themselves. And I knew, with absolute certainty, how deeply ironic their current predicament was. They spoke of their struggles, carefully omitting the extravagance that led them there, and I listened, my expression unreadable. They expected, perhaps, a lecture, a gloating smile, or at best, a cold refusal. Instead, I offered them a glass of water, my voice as calm and steady as the city lights outside. "Tell me everything," I had said, from the very beginning. It was a simple request, yet their eyes, even in their distress, held a flicker of surprise, perhaps even a hint of hope that I might simply write them a check without further inquiry. They had no idea of the quiet storm brewing beneath my serene exterior, the perfectly orchestrated revelation that was about to unfold, or the meticulous chronicle of their disdain that I had carried for decades. Their desperation was a spectacle, yes, but it was also the final, pivotal piece in a much larger narrative, one that had been unfolding since I was a boy. And I knew, despite their current humiliation, that they still held a sliver of their old condescension, a belief that I, Orion, the childish hobbyist, couldn't possibly comprehend the real-world complexities of their financial woes. Oh, how wrong they were. The game, as I saw it, was finally entering its decisive final act, and I held all the winning cards, cards they never even knew existed. My earliest memories are bathed in the glow of a phosphor screen and the hum of a nascent internet. While other children dreamed of sports heroes or pop stars, my mind was a vibrant playground of pixels, algorithms, and logical structures. I saw worlds waiting to be built, connections waiting to be forged, and problems waiting to be solved, all within the boundless potential of digital space. This was not a hobby to me, it was an innate calling, a language my soul understood more profoundly than any spoken tongue. But to my family, particularly Uncle Cyrus and Aunt Seraphina, it was, as Cyrus often bellowed, a complete waste of time, and as Seraphina would sigh dramatically, such a shame, Orion, when you could be doing something useful. I remember a particularly painful Thanksgiving dinner when I was 18. I had just finished my first rudimentary game prototype, a simple puzzle platformer I had poured months into, learning everything from coding to art design through sheer stubborn will and countless hours of online tutorials. I was bursting with pride, naive enough to believe they might share a flicker of my excitement. "I want to build a company," I declared, my voice trembling with youthful conviction, "a place where people can create and connect through technology, like games and digital experiences." Uncle Cyrus, then enjoying a brief, ill-fated stint as a regional manager for a struggling retail chain, let out a booming laugh that echoed through the dining room. "A company? With your little video games, Orion? That's not a business, nephew, that's a distraction. Go get a real job. Something with stability. Benefits." He then launched into a long, rambling monologue about the real world, filled with buzzwords like synergy and market penetration, none of which he truly understood, but all of which sounded impressive to Aunt Seraphina. Seraphina, ever the pragmatist, patted my arm condescendingly. "Orion, dear, it's sweet, your little hobby, but you need to think about your future." "A secure future. Maybe accounting?" Or law. Something that provides actual income, not just pixels. She looked at me as if I had announced my intention to become a professional cloud watcher. Their words were not merely dismissals, they were a constant, pervasive hum of doubt. Every family gathering became an interrogation. Still messing with those computers, Orion? Found a proper job yet? Your cousin Sarah just got promoted at the bank, so proud of her stability. They painted my ambition as childish, my dedication as idleness, and my quiet focus as a sign of my lack of real-world intelligence. They never saw the late nights I spent hunched over a flickering screen, debugging lines of code until my eyes burned, or the countless meager meals I prepared to save every penny for server space or software licenses. They never witnessed the moments of exhilarating breakthrough when a complex problem finally yielded to my relentless pursuit, or the quiet despair of a failed launch, followed by the resolute determination to learn from it and try again. My secret weapon wasn't a hidden inheritance or a powerful mentor. It was far more fundamental, forged in the crucible of their skepticism, an insatiable curiosity, an unwavering belief in the transformative power of technology, and a profoundly disciplined approach to self-education. While they scoffed, I devoured books on programming languages, marketing, finance, and user experience design. While they spoke of real jobs, I was building my own curriculum, a bespoke university of innovation tailored to my specific vision. My plan wasn't a single, grand blueprint, but a series of interconnected, iterative experiments. I understood that building an empire wasn't about a single grand gesture but about thousands of small, intelligent decisions, each one building on the last, quietly, relentlessly. I learned to harness their dismissiveness as fuel. Every sneer was a reminder of what I was fighting for, every condescending remark a brick in the foundation of my resolve. I decided then and there that I would not just succeed for myself, but I would build something so undeniably monumental that it would serve as an irrefutable answer to their every doubt. And I would do it in a way that would leave them utterly bewildered, unable to comprehend the silent assent they had so willfully ignored. The early years were a grueling marathon of iteration and resilience. While Cyrus continued his series of ill-fated ventures, a specialized dog grooming salon that went bankrupt, a chain of artisanal coffee shops that failed to brew profit, and a questionable investment in a pyramid scheme disguised as wellness supplements, I was quietly laying the groundwork for my digital ecosystem. Each of his failures, conveniently blamed on market forces or unscrupulous partners, was met with Serafina's increasingly desperate pleas for him to just get a steady job like everyone else. And each time, they'd turn to me, not for advice, but for a fresh round of their usual condescension. Orion, still in your little digital sandbox? Cyrus would ask at family holiday gatherings, a rhetorical question wrapped in a sneer. You know, if you ever want to work on something real, like actual businesses with physical products, let me know. I could probably get you an entry-level position somewhere. He truly believed he was offering me a lifeline, completely oblivious that I was already navigating a far more complex and lucrative landscape than his limited imagination could conceive. Serafina would add, "Your mother worries about you, dear. All that time indoors can't be good for a young man." She truly thought I was just playing on the computer, utterly blind to the fact that playing was precisely how I was learning, building, and innovating. My plan in motion was less a grand, overt strategy and more a meticulously executed stealth operation. I started small, with freelance web development gigs, then moved into creating niche gaming apps. Most of them failed. Miserably. But each failure was a masterclass in market analysis, user experience, and agile development. I learned to fail fast, learn faster, and pivot with precision. I reinvested every single dollar, living a life of extreme frugality. My apartment was sparse, my diet simple, my social life practically non-existent. While my cousins were buying their first homes or cars, I was pouring my meager earnings into obscure cloud computing services and specialist development tools. I remember one particular Christmas, I politely declined an expensive family dinner because I had to meet a critical development deadline for a new mobile game that had shown a flicker of promise. Cyrus scoffed, "Still prioritizing your imaginary games over family, Orion? Some things never change." Serafina sighed dramatically, "Such a shame. It's important to network, dear. You never know who you might meet who could help you find a proper career." They had no idea that the imaginary game I was finalizing would, within 18 months, generate a significant, quiet revenue stream, becoming the seed money for my first truly scalable venture. As I built, I created a network of small, interconnected entities. A digital marketing agency that specialized in nascent tech companies, feeding off the very innovation my family dismissed. A small game studio that focused on niche, high-retention audiences. A content creation platform that leveraged the burgeoning influencer economy. Each was a separate legal entity, a distinct business, but all were subtly interconnected, sharing resources, data, and expertise, all under my quiet, centralized guidance. I was building a sprawling, diversified portfolio, each part reinforcing the others, creating a resilient, self-sustaining ecosystem. But to my family, I was still just Orion, who does something with computers, a benign, slightly eccentric presence. Their arrogance grew in direct proportion to my silence. They saw my lack of ostentation as a sign of continued struggle, not as a deliberate choice, part of my strategic camouflage. They were trapped in their outdated paradigms, convinced that visible struggle was the only path to visible success. And because my path was invisible to them, they naturally assumed it was non-existent. They continued to talk about their big plans, Cyrus's latest foray into disrupting the local real estate market with a poorly researched online portal, Serafina's ill-advised investment in a dubious network marketing scheme. Their financial troubles were whispers at first, then increasingly loud rumors, all while I continued to build, brick by digital brick, my silent empire, waiting for the precise moment when the foundation of their hubris would finally give way. The anticipation was not born of malice, but of a quiet, profound certainty that justice, in its own time, would be served. The precise moment of the climax wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow, excruciating collapse that played out over several weeks, culminating in their arrival at my office. The first real cracks in their facade had appeared a few months prior, whispered through the family grapevine. Uncle Cyrus's disruptive real estate portal had imploded, saddling him with crippling debt from predatory short-term loans. Aunt Serafina's network marketing scheme, which she had bragged about for months as her ticket to early retirement, turned out to be a classic pyramid scheme, leaving her with mountains of unsellable products and a significant portion of her savings gone. The pleas for help started small, through my parents, hinting at temporary cash flow issues. I was always polite, expressed sympathy, but subtly deferred, suggesting they explore all their options. This, naturally, frustrated them. They expected me to simply step in. They still saw me as the same Orion they knew, a potential easy mark, albeit one they had to humble themselves to approach. The Zygarnik effect was in full force for them, their problem was unresolved, gnawing at them, and they desperately sought closure, a solution. And they believed, deep down, that I held it. The family dinner, the setting I had always imagined for the grand reveal, never happened quite that way. Instead, their desperation escalated until, one Tuesday afternoon, my assistant calmly informed me that Uncle Cyrus and Aunt Serafina were in the lobby, unannounced, urgent. I had anticipated this. I had been tracking their public financial records, watching the storm clouds gather. I knew they were at rock bottom. When they entered my office, the transformation from their usual selves was stark. Cyrus's usually booming laugh was a dry cough, his expansive gestures replaced by wrung hands. Serafina, typically radiating a brittle confidence, looked as though she hadn't slept in days, her face pale, her eyes hollow. They sat on the edge of the plush visitor chairs, avoiding eye contact as they began their practiced performance of unfortunate circumstances. Orion, Cyrus began, his voice surprisingly weak, we find ourselves in a rather liquid situation. Some unforeseen challenges. Serafina chimed in, yes, darling, just a temporary hiccup. But it requires immediate capital, you see. And we thought, well, your family, and you've always been so resourceful. They spoke of needing a significant loan, downplaying the amount, which I knew was utterly insufficient to cover their true liabilities. They then launched into a veiled appeal to my sense of familial obligation, carefully omitting any mention of their past dismissals. I listened patiently, my gaze steady, my expression unreadable. I let them finish, every word a painful echo of their past arrogance. When they were done, a heavy silence hung in the air, thick with their unspoken plea. I leaned forward, my voice calm, almost conversational. Uncle Cyrus, Aunt Serafina, I began, I understand your situation.
It's certainly a challenging one.
But before we discuss alone, I think it's important that we are all completely transparent about the scope of the problem. I then pressed a button on my desk, and the massive display screen on the far wall illuminated, showing a complex financial diagram. It wasn't just their personal debt, it detailed every failed venture, every unfulfilled promise, every loan they had taken out, every asset they had leveraged and lost.
It was a comprehensive, meticulously researched financial autopsy of their entire economic history.
The data streamed across the screen, charts, figures, legal documents, all sourced from public records, presented with chilling clarity.
Their eyes widened. First in confusion, then dawning horror. What is this, Orion?
Cyrus stammered, his eyes darting across the screen, recognizing names of failed businesses, personal guarantees, and delinquent accounts he thought were private. This, I said, my voice still even, is a complete financial overview of your current situation. It paints a more accurate picture than the one you've just described. Your total liabilities, as you can see here, exceed $8 million. Your assets are virtually non-existent. And your legal obligations are, frankly, quite dire.
Aunt Serafina gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. 8 million? That's impossible.
Where did you get this?
Public records, I stated simply.
And a very thorough team of analysts. You see, I believe in thorough due diligence, especially when considering significant financial commitments. Then, I paused, letting the numbers sink in, letting the full weight of their collapse settle upon them. Their faces were a kaleidoscope of shock, humiliation, and a terrifying realization that their carefully constructed facade had been utterly dismantled. And now, I continued, my voice taking on a different timbre, still calm, but imbued with an undeniable authority, let's talk about the resourcefulness you just mentioned.
You see this number here?
I pointed to a figure on the screen, a vast sum representing the valuation of my consolidated companies. This is a conservative estimate of the current market valuation of my primary holding company, Orion Digital Group.
It represents, among other things, a network of highly successful digital media platforms, several market-leading mobile games, and a burgeoning AI-driven analytics firm.
It's an empire, built quietly, brick by digital brick, over the last 2 decades. The same 2 decades during which you consistently dismissed my ambitions as a childish hobby and urged me to get a real job.
I let the full irony of my words hang in the air.
Cyrus slumped back in his chair, his face ashen. Serafina stared at the screen, then at me, her eyes glazed with a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension. The realization hit them like a physical blow. The childish hobbies had not only survived but had dwarfed their real businesses to an unimaginable extent. Their scorn had been directed at a phoenix rising from the ashes of their cynicism, a phoenix they were now desperately pleading with for a single feather. The power had irrevocably shifted, and they were utterly, completely at my mercy.
The silence in the room was deafening, punctuated only by Serafina's ragged breath. The game was over.
The immediate aftermath of the reveal was a tableau of stunned silence and dawning, gut-wrenching realization. Uncle Cyrus, who had always projected an aura of boisterous authority, was deflated, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the dizzying figures on the screen as if they held some impossible, alien code. Aunt Serafina, usually so composed, began to hyperventilate softly, her face a blotchy red and white. Their carefully maintained pride, their very sense of superiority, shattered into a million pieces at their feet. They had come to beg for a few $100,000, perhaps $1 million, and were confronted with the scope of a multi-billion-dollar enterprise they had scoffed at for decades. The gap between their perception and the reality of my achievements was so vast it was almost comical, if not for the tragic implications for them. This isn't possible, Cyrus finally managed, his voice a whisper, devoid of its usual bluster. All these years, you were just playing on your computer. His mind clearly struggled to reconcile the image of the quiet, introverted boy he dismissed with the titan of industry sitting before him. Serafina, her voice choked with something akin to a sob, added, Orion, darling, why didn't you ever say anything? Why didn't you tell us you were so successful? The question hung in the air, dripping with a belated, self-serving curiosity. I looked at them, not with triumph, but with a profound sense of calm vindication. I did, Aunt Serafina, I replied, my voice steady, many, many times. I spoke of building, of innovation, of digital platforms. But you heard childish hobby. You heard waste of time. You projected your own limitations onto my ambitions.
What would have been the point of telling you? You refused to listen then, and I doubted you would have believed me even if I had shown you my early balance sheets.
You were too busy telling me to get a real job, while I was busy creating countless real jobs for others, and building something far more substantive than anything you ever dreamed of. The truth landed with a heavy thud. Their faces contorted, not just with shock at the scale of my wealth, but with the searing pain of their own misjudgment, their own hubris. It wasn't just about money, it was about their fundamental misunderstanding of ambition, vision, and the very nature of success itself. They saw now, in agonizing detail, how their own cynicism had blinded them. They tried to apologize, mumbled something about not understanding the digital world. But their words felt hollow, born more out of desperation than genuine remorse. I simply nodded, letting them flounder in the uncomfortable silence, letting the full weight of the situation press down on them. It wasn't about vengeance for me, it was about the undeniable, irrefutable proof that their dismissals had been utterly, profoundly wrong, and that their own choices had led them directly to this moment. I watched as the realization deepened. Not only had I succeeded beyond their wildest imaginations, but I was also the only person who could possibly extract them from the abyss they had dug for themselves. The balance of power was not just shifted, it was completely inverted. They, who had once held court over my life's choices, were now reduced to supplicants, gazing up at the very empire they had ridiculed into existence. Other family members, having heard whispers of their true financial state, began to call. Some were genuinely concerned, others, I suspected, were simply curious about the scale of the disaster. But none, not a single one, offered concrete help. They all instinctively looked to me, the quiet one, the one they barely noticed, the one they had always underestimated. The fallout wasn't just about Cyrus and Seraphina, it was about the ripple effect through the family, the sudden, collective recognition of a truth they had all, in varying degrees, opted to ignore. And in that moment, as I looked at the broken figures before me, I knew the path forward, a path that balanced justice with a carefully considered, strategic mercy. The months that followed were a period of calm resolution, a deliberate untangling of threads that had long been intertwined. After that pivotal meeting, Uncle Cyrus and Aunt Seraphina were, for the first time in their lives, utterly devoid of their usual bluster. Their pleas became less about demanding and more about genuinely asking for guidance, a stark contrast to their previous condescension. I did not offer them a blank check, nor did I allow them to return to their old ways of reckless spending. Instead, I presented them with a comprehensive, albeit stringent, plan. I offered to help them navigate their legal and financial obligations, to restructure their remaining assets, and to mitigate the most severe consequences of their debt. This involved liquidating their few remaining luxury items, selling properties they could no longer afford, and entering into a rigorous, long-term repayment plan that would require years of diligent effort on their part. It was not a bailout, but a pathway to solvency, one that demanded accountability and a complete re-evaluation of their priorities. Crucially, my assistance came with a single, unspoken condition: they had to understand, truly understand, the nature of their past mistakes, not just financially, but in their judgment of others. I never explicitly lectured them, but my quiet, methodical approach, the sheer competence with which my team handled their complex legal and financial mess, served as a constant, undeniable lesson. They saw the difference between superficial bravado and genuine, strategically built success. Cyrus, for the first time, took on a modest, steady job, working diligently to contribute to his repayment plan. Seraphina, shedding her materialistic obsessions, found purpose in community volunteering, discovering a quiet satisfaction she'd never known. It was a long, arduous road for them, stripped of their former luxuries and illusions, but it was a path towards something far more authentic. As for me, the incident cemented my position, not just within my family, but in my own understanding of true strength. There was no need for grand pronouncements or public gloating. My success spoke for itself, an undeniable testament to unwavering vision and relentless execution. I found a profound peace in my work, continuing to expand Orion Digital Group into new frontiers, driven by curiosity and a genuine desire to create value, not by a need for external validation. My quiet resolve had paid off, not just in financial terms, but in a deeper sense of knowing myself and my capabilities.
The family dynamics also shifted.
There was a new respect in their eyes, a silent acknowledgement of my path.
The condescending questions vanished, replaced by genuine interest, sometimes even requests for humble advice.
I reciprocated with courtesy and genuine care, understanding that while their past dismissals hurt, they were rooted more in their own limitations than in any malicious intent. The story of Cyrus and Seraphina became a private parable within our family, a quiet reminder that judgment often says more about the judge than the judged. It underscored a fundamental truth that I had always instinctively known: true ambition rarely screams for attention, it works, quietly, intelligently, and persistently, building its own reality, brick by digital brick.
Ultimately, this journey taught me that the loudest voices are not always the wisest, and the most obvious paths are not always the most rewarding.
Success is not merely about accumulating wealth, it is about the unwavering pursuit of your authentic vision, regardless of the noise of your detractors. It is about understanding that while others may laugh at your dreams, their laughter often stems from their inability to see beyond their own limited horizons. Embrace your unique path, cultivate your quiet strengths, and let your determined efforts build a legacy so undeniable that, eventually, those who once mocked you will be left with no choice but to acknowledge the very empire they helped you forge through their doubt. Their skepticism, in a strange twist of fate, became the very crucible in which my greatest triumphs were ultimately forged.